Hey everybody, what's happening? My name's Steven.
And I'm Spencer.
We work with Nexus Youth and Family Services here in Amador County, and we've partnered with Stanford University to bring you the Cannabis Awareness and Prevention Toolkit. We will be discussing cannabis, specifically what is known so far. Then we will talk about why people use cannabis and the various forms of cannabis that exist. We will also explore the science behind cannabis and the evolution of it over the years. Once all of that is covered, we will then discuss the impact that it can have on the adolescent brain.
So these terms are all used to identify cannabis. There are over 1,200 different slang terms out there, and they reflect the cultural phenomenon and stigma it may carry as it takes on many different names. These names can sometimes carry positive or negative associations, and sometimes people fall into two extreme camps of thinking. One side says cannabis is horrible and serves no human value, while the other side argues that it's the best drug you could use and will solve every health issue. In this presentation, we want to talk about it in a non-judgmental and a fact-based way, so we'll be referring to it just as cannabis.
The goal here is not to preach or present the typical just say no program. The goal is to give you some information that will help you in your decision-making process. You probably have heard cannabis users say that it makes them feel good or they like the way they feel when they're high. You also may know a successful adult or somebody that you look up to that uses cannabis.
So here's a list of reasons why young people use cannabis that was actually developed by students. Let's go through the list really quickly. So here you have wanting to fit in or peer pressure, the different flavors. You have enjoy the feeling of being high or that it feels good. Some say it improves their concentration. Some say it helps them sleep. You have recreational use there, friends or family who use. Some say to relieve feelings of anger, anxiety, depression, or stress, which I would say is probably the most common one we get. Over there by Steven, you have medicinal purposes or self-medication. Underneath that, you have just curious because of adult use. And then underneath that one, they use it to forget, escape, or to relax.
One common reason that people use is because cannabis feels good to them and it brings them pleasure. It is natural to seek pleasure. As a young person, it's part of your job to figure out what you like and what you do not like. In this process, some may find it pleasurable and some may not. It's important to note that not everyone experiences cannabis the same way because of how their brains are wired. It's important to know the effects of cannabis and the many impacts that it can have in one's life, especially on your developing brain.
The national survey of high school students found that nearly 25% or 1 out of 4 high school students had used cannabis in 2019, which included if somebody had just tried it one time. So some of you guys may be thinking, well, everyone is using, so why don't I use it as well? But surveys like this and other ones that have been done demonstrate that a majority of young people are actually not using cannabis.
So what we're going to do is we're going to throw out a couple different statements and we're going to see if they're fact or if they're opinion. The first one is, for most people, cannabis helps you learn. This is an opinion. Some say it's a fact, but it is just an opinion. Cannabis throws your hippocampus and the amygdala out of balance. It can interfere with your hippocampus's ability to turn short-term memories into long-term ones. And also it can disrupt your ability to access those long-term memories. There is scientific evidence to support this, and evidence showing that adolescent cannabis users are more likely to have lower grades and they are less likely to graduate.
So next statement is, cannabis is legal in some states, so it must be good for you. And again, this is an opinion. Cannabis is legal in some states, but for those who are over 21. So why do you think this is the case? In California, the law legalizing cannabis use is called the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, and it was never intended to legalize cannabis for those who are under the age of 21. Cannabis interferes with healthy brain development, and we're going to show you in a few slides how important structures of the brain can be affected by it.
The next statement says you cannot die from an overdose of cannabis. That is fact. There are no known cases of someone dying from direct use of cannabis alone. However, you can make some risky decisions while high and hurt yourself and even somebody else. Think of someone who attempts to drive on the freeway, or someone who is hallucinating after having an edible, thinking they might be able to fly right off their balcony. This actually occurred a few years ago, and you may have heard some people use this story to try and scare you. Although this is just an example, you can hurt yourself while high.
The next statement is, cannabis can be addictive. This is also a fact. While most users do not become addicted, about 1 out of every 6 youth users become addicted to cannabis. And these chances of addiction are higher the earlier you begin using. So why is that? It's because the brain is still developing and use can overstimulate the nucleus accumbens, aka the reward center, which is highly susceptible to addiction. And we'll discuss this more in detail later.
Lastly, we're going to say is Since the cannabis legalization in Colorado 4 years ago, the usage rates for teens have gone up by 25%. This is actually false. Many expected that there would be an increase in young people using following the legalization. But in this case, there was not an increase in use among young people. However, Colorado did witness an increase in other drug use. Research shows that attitudes of a substance's harmfulness decrease, more people begin to use it. Social science researchers expect to eventually see a rise in places where it has been legalized for recreational use, but this has not yet occurred.
So there are two chemicals in cannabis that are responsible for causing direct effects on the body. One is responsible for the buzz or high, and one is responsible for treating a larger number of medical problems such as anxiety, epileptic seizures, inflammation, and the inability to sleep. So the first one is called THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, which gives cannabis a psychoactive property, meaning it makes the user feel high. The second one is CBD, or cannabidiol, and it is the non-psychoactive compound and can be used for clinical or medical purposes when used under the supervision of a medical professional. So next up in the next slide, guys, we're going to watch a short video that discusses the evolution of cannabis over the years in the forms of THC potency.
Got high. Believe me, hippies in the 60s got high. I was there, okay? That weed had this tetrahydrocannabinol in it, and it had 1 to 3% THC. And it's very important to understand this drug worked fine. People got high in the 60s, no problem. They all got the munchies and everything that you talk about. This drug worked, okay? Next thing that happened in the late 60s was the Vietnam War. And a lot of people went to Vietnam, including me. And the weed in Vietnam was totally different. It was a totally different experience. And the reason was, it was 5 to 10% THC. Now, in order to understand the numbers on this, let's say this was 2% and this is 8%. This weed was 4 times stronger than this weed. And the reason was, it was a different strain. It was all cannabis, but the cannabis in the States was cannabis sativa, where the cannabis in Vietnam was cannabis indica. And so this is a much stronger strain. So what some of the soldiers said was, hey, listen, if we ever brought this back to the States, people go crazy for this stuff back in the States. Those people took those indica seeds and said, listen, let's not leave California. Let's just go up north to Humboldt County and Mendocino County. And they just got trees up there. We'll plant these indica seeds and start ourselves a little marijuana business. Boy, did they ever. So they started to grow just female indica plants, and that bumped it up to 10 to 15% THC. And you guys weren't born yet. Now we got to fast forward about 25 years while they are up there cloning and hybrids and fertilizing and everything else, so that the common weed in our little Northern California is between 15 and 20% THC. Compare that to what hippies were getting high on here. This is a whole other ballgame of drug here. And wax is right around 50% THC. And I don't want to go through all of the ones here, but I'll tell you the last one that you end up with is a dab. And a dab is 95% THC. This is the level of where you guys are coming in to this thing here right now. And not only are you coming in on this level, but you're also coming in a teenage time. This is a whole other ball game of what it does.
Cannabis has many short-term effects on the human body. Some of the obvious physical changes include red eyes, dry mouth, impaired motor coordination, increase in your heart rate, delayed response to people and even your environment, increased appetite, also known as the munchies, and muscle relaxation. Now, for someone experiencing the high or the intoxication from cannabis, they may feel the following: skin sensation of hot or cold, memory loss or an inability to recall certain memories, pleasure, bliss, paranoia or fright, and an altered perception of time and space. These effects are the results of THC and CBD acting on different parts of the body.
There are parts of the body that can suffer due to long-term cannabis use. Those who smoke it run the risk of damaging their lungs over time, and a lot of harmful and cancerous chemicals released from cigarettes are also released from cannabis. And since we're talking about cigarettes and tobacco, it's important to note that smoke is smoke. Secondhand smoke from cannabis is released like in cigarettes and as secondhand aerosol in e-cigarettes and vape pens. The heart is also negatively affected, but this may be due to other substances that are found in the plant. There is strong evidence that cannabis negatively impacts the brain, especially a young person's brain, which is explained more in later slides.
So much about cannabis is changing very quickly. Legalization is changing across the country and usage rates are increasing as well. And yet there is essentially no research on the long-term health effects on its use. Anyone studying cannabis would tell you we don't know everything about the long-term consequences. We do know that high levels of THC are new and not fully studied. Much of the research that's been done have analyzed the effects of THC at concentration levels of 12 to 14%, when we know that some of the commercial products now are as strong as 95% in THC.
A few studies have looked at the effects on the lungs and heart from vaping or aerosolizing cannabis, or the effects of edibles on the heart or the digestive system. The potential long-term effects on mental health are concerning as well. So far we know it can have desirable and undesirable effects on a person's mental stability, depending on a lot of variables, but this area requires more research. And finally, what risk for cancer? There's no strong evidence linking cannabis use to cancer yet, but there is need to research this further, especially with the high amounts of THC that come in some products.
The hippocampus can be thought of as a memory gateway. It's important in forming new memories. It allows you to turn short-term memories into long-term ones. It allows you to access your long-term memory when needed, and it trashes unimportant information that your brain doesn't care to remember. It is clear that the hippocampus retrieves old information from your memory and stores new information into your long-term memory.
So let's review the functions of the hippocampus. Information from the world enters your hippocampus and can be stored in your long-term memory. You use your hippocampus to recall certain information, which allows you to form sentences and describe your experiences. So what happens to this process when THC is introduced into the system? THC from cannabis makes it more difficult to learn new information since it makes the hippocampus sluggish, and also makes it difficult to remember information since it's hard to access your long-term memories. Studies on rats demonstrated negative impacts of certain types of learning and memory exercises later in life when the hippocampus was exposed to THC in adolescence.
One way to think about this is to imagine someone who is high stumbling across what looks like the most wonderful apple ever. In reality, this is just a plain apple, but because the cannabis is affecting the function of their hippocampus, this person is not able to recall the detailed short and long-term information about apples that they have stored in their brain. It's almost like this is the first apple they've ever encountered, so eating it seems especially enjoyable. This can be amusing to think about, but can you think of any ways that this inability to tap into your memories can have a negative impact on somebody? What do you think happens to this person who is no longer high and they taste the same apple, but it's not the most wonderful apple anymore? We will discuss how the hippocampus and other parts of the brain can become dulled down over time.
A high percentage of the cannabis high is due to its effect on the amygdala. The amygdala assigns emotional value to experiences and allows you to emotionally connect with others and bond. This is a critical part of being human and it's key to survival. Speaking of survival, our sense of fear is regulated by the amygdala. Also, we can feel a sense of awe or experience that wow moment because of our amygdala. Our amygdala allows us to recognize anything new or familiar which awakens our interest, and for a young person this is key to learning new information in school and in life. Overall, the amygdala allows us to perceive emotions or effective behaviors and feelings in yourself and in other humans.
When THC acts on the amygdala, it can easily turn an everyday object or scene into a source of artificial fascination and assign emotional relevance to it. Imagine walking past a line of ants, and depending on your mood or your personality, you might find them interesting or you might just walk right by them. In contrast though, someone high or intoxicated from THC might become intrigued by these ants. They might observe the ants for an unusually long time. They begin wondering about where they're going and what it's like to even be an ant. They may even begin to develop an emotional attachment to these ants. Again, this might sound amusing, but how might this negatively impact this person's ability to function?
Your motor system or your movement center are controlled by your cerebellum and your basal ganglia, which are affected by cannabis. The basal ganglia is responsible for turning intention into instruction. The cerebellum fine-tunes your actions and even controls the internal and external coordination of your body. So let's say you're playing baseball and the ball is flying your way. Well, your basal ganglia would turn the intention of catching the ball into the instruction for your legs to run to the ball, and would also instruct your arm to reach out to catch the ball before it hits the ground. Then your cerebellum would calculate the angle your arms and legs need to be at in order for you to catch the ball.
THC affects the basal ganglia and the cerebellum by diminishing any spontaneous activity, meaning your body has a slower reaction time. This is because there's a calming effect which can make some almost seem motionless. Because the cerebellum is responsible for coordination, there is less control of the body and the body movement while high. Some people may feel more relaxed and more free when they're high. Some can become clumsy, and some even feel that they have an easier time moving. For example, some people may think that they dance better when they're high. This has more to do with the decreased inhibitions and muscle relaxation while high, and less to do with an improvement of their dancing skill. Another result is that time seems to slow down and distances appear larger. How might this affect someone's reaction time, especially when they're driving a vehicle?
So continued use of cannabis can hijack the brain's natural reward center, and this occurs through reductions in the brain's dopamine production and eventually leads to a dulling of the pleasure center. Because dopamine is part of the reward system, the brain is fooled into believing that cannabis is critical for survival, even if the user understands logically that it is not. The reward system responds with drug-seeking behaviors, which influence the user to continue using cannabis despite any negative consequences they're experiencing from using. Cravings develop and eventually lead to dependence. This means the user relies on cannabis to experience pleasure, relaxation, curiosity, and possibly stress relief, and has a difficult time feeling those things without cannabis being present.
Having the reward center in your brain hijacked during adolescence is especially dangerous. As a young person, your brain has lots of connections based on what you learn and what you practice. During late adolescence and into adulthood, the brain begins to cut out connections that are not being unused. This process is called synaptic pruning. When you reach adulthood, the necessary and most often used synaptic connections remain and are stronger and more efficient. This allows the brain to be really skilled at fewer functions.
So another way to think about this is to consider roads. During your teen years, your brain looks a little like the LA freeway system. There are a lot of new connections and roads going everywhere and connecting in multiple places. As you start to get older, your brain starts to prune away some of these additional connections to help consolidate your learning. By the time you're in your early to mid-20s, your brain has reduced the number of synapses or freeways. This is the reason it's possible to speak 2 or more languages in childhood, but only 1 in adulthood. If we don't use those language roads, they will get pruned away. The opposite is actually also true. If you practice using those language roads into adulthood, you can be fluent in multiple different languages, and this process can happen with any skills depending on whether or not you're practicing them.
Now, let's think about this and how all of these effects might compound when experienced all together. We know that cannabis affects the hippocampus, making learning and remembering information difficult. The effects on the amygdala cause artificial fascination and emotional reactions to otherwise mundane experiences. The effects of the basal ganglia and cerebellum negatively impact your coordination.
So now let's take all these effects into consideration and think about the ways they would all blend together. After using cannabis for some time, a student may not be excited by a new idea in class as they otherwise may have been before. A day after use, an athlete may feel sluggish and unable to respond quickly enough to keep up with an opponent, and 1 half step can make all the difference in a competitive game. These types of disadvantages are well known and influence real-world policies. Airline pilots, for example, are not allowed to use cannabis at all because it can affect their ability to do their job, and especially in quick decision-making processes. In fact, when their piloting abilities were tested in flying simulations, their reaction times were sometimes affected for days at a time.
In these slides, we have emphasized the importance of healthy brain development. Your brain needs to figure out how to find pleasure naturally. It's also important to learn what makes you feel relaxed, helps you relieve stress, helps you manage anxiety, and what even helps you focus. These are important components of figuring out who you are and how you want to deal with your environment and the things going on around you. Relying on cannabis to fill all of those different roles will only cheat your brain from learning important skills as a young person. The scary part is cannabis can work so well at first that it's possible to transition into adulthood without ever learning these important skills. This would be like learning to ride a bike with training wheels and never taking them off. But just like children who need to eventually stop relying on training wheels, relying on cannabis or any other substance for that matter to deal with the challenges of life will ultimately hold you back from fulfilling your capabilities.
So that's it for this presentation, guys. We want to remind you that we at Nexus do not condone the use of cannabis for anybody under the age of 21. We're bringing you these presentations to give you as much information as we possibly can so you guys can make healthy and intelligent decisions on what to do with your body. We're going to have 2 more videos on this cannabis prevention toolkit coming out to you guys here in the next few days. As always, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to give us a call. Our number here is 209-257-1980. You can listen to my extension or Steven's extension. Also, check out our YouTube page, youtube.com/Nexus Youth and Family Services, and check us out on Facebook as well. And as always, guys, stay healthy and stay safe.